welcome to another edition of Dialogue coming to you on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. U.S. has always been pointing its finger at China for alleged online attacks. Its media complained earlier this year their computer systems were breached by China-based hackers. And recently, U.S. cybersecurity firm Mandiant released a report alleging that a secret Chinese military unit in Shanghai was behind years of cyber attacks against U.S. companies. Confronted with the unfounded accusations, the Ministry of National Defense here in China responded quickly with a written statement and a news conference. So what lies behind the groundless China bashing in cyberspace? Are IP addresses convincing evidence of hacking? Now I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Harry Shang. He is the Corporate Vice President of Microsoft Corporation. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
But before I go to a discussion with you, let's take a look at this background report.
Secrets of U.S. government data and corporate trade. These are the things reported to be stolen by China's military. The evidence is the IP addresses linked to China. Chinese cybersecurity experts say the assumption lacks technical foundations.
It's impossible to locate the physical address of the attackers. The IP address can be easily simulated or transferred. It's just like you cannot locate a physical address by simply tracking phone numbers.
Senior Internet engineer Cai Zhiqiang says cyber attacks are transnational, anonymous and deceptive, with their sources often difficult to identify. The U.S. Internet security firm says China's military is behind the hacking of the U.S. agencies and businesses. Chinese military has dismissed the accusations and says China itself is the biggest victim of cyber attack and that most of them come from the U.S. China's military says that in 2012 alone, foreign hackers used viruses and other malicious software to seize control of Chinese computers and websites. Chinese experts say the U.S. accusation has a complex background.
The U.S. accusations of Chinese cyber espionage or cyber threats have deep social and political motives, as well as national interest and Western ideology.
But why do you think the U.S. selects China?
China's IT sector and economy have grown rapidly, and the U.S. sees China's rise as a challenge to its interests.
Professor Wei Wei believes the release of the Mandiant report increases the pressure on the U.S. government to take more forceful action to contain China's cyber development. Han Bin, CCTV.
Dr. Shang, welcome to Dialogue. There has been a lot of information in the news suggesting there have been cyber attacks coming from China. Meanwhile, China has been claiming that itself been attacked by hackers, both from within the country and also from overseas. That's according to the National Computer Network Emergency Response Coordination Center here in this country. How serious is the situation?
There have been a lot more cyber activities around the world. From what we can see, Microsoft, we actually are very interested in seeing the situation evolving. And we have actually recently have done a study overall looking at some index numbers of overall the cyber activities happening there. We have compiled a report looking at 80 different socio-economic and technical parameters across 105 countries. We have found that China is just about right in the middle in terms of all the cyber activities there. It's very important to realize that all those things are happening depending on how familiar the users are with the level of familiarity of the computers, networking, and in the cyberspace. So we believe that the China is right in the middle, and I think there are a lot of things that we can do in the country.
What does it mean, really? Even though you said it is in the middle, according to your index, when it comes to dangers of cyber attack against this country or individuals in this country, what might be the worst scenario? People have to be prepared. The country has to be prepared for the worst scenario. What is it?
Right. That's a very good question. I can give you some numbers to see where we are, like in a country like China. I think a lot of those things really depends on how sophisticated the computer users are, the understanding about are you aware of some of those cyber activities that you experience? What kind of consequence you might actually really get there?
So the worst scenario is?
Well, the worst scenario is someone might even take over your computer and you might become a real victim. You can lose your online ID. Someone may behave like you, but it's really not you. You could lose a lot of money and you could have some kind of life danger.
That's for individuals. What about for the country?
I think at the corporation and the country level, there are also a lot of possibilities that some large networks can be taken away, and all the way from not only the computer networks, even other infrastructures like all the electricity grids.
There are 3 kinds of attacks, according to some Chinese NGOs analyzing the attacks situation against China, coming from 3 kinds. One is the Trojans, and also the zombie viruses coming from overseas. The other is to spread the malicious codes via domain names registered overseas. And third is to attack Chinese internet through some of the domestic zombie computer, which has been compromised already by overseas hackers. Which of these 3 categories are the most dangerous one you would identify?
Those are indeed a very common practice that we have seen in the computer and the internet industry. And it's really hard to really see which one is the most dominating. As you see, over the time, you see all kinds of activities going on. I think from where we can observe, from Microsoft, we actually recommend our users to really take a lot of precautions as they think about this kind of attacks. For example, and you should be very careful about the kind of spams you come into your own computer or your own email inbox. So we recommend the users to use the software so you make sure that you filter out all the spams and you don't click on a lot of those suspicious links.
That's of course for the individuals, but once again for the national security, it's a very serious matter. There's very similar both accusations and the feeling of threat inside the United States as well. According to some of the statistics I was reading before you came into the studio, one number coming from the Information System Security Association conference, which is based in the United States in January, 79% of those attending the conference suggesting the United States is facing a major cyber attack against it within a year. How would people reach that conclusion, first of all? And secondly, how dangerous is the situation for the United States? You are based in the U.S. right now.
I would say, for a big country like the United States or China, given the size of the network, the number of computers, the sophistication of the network, and naturally there will be a lot more activities, what's really happening there. And from what we can see, at Microsoft, and we do see a lot of activities in those large countries. It's actually not very surprising that there are more activities in places like China or United States.
Not surprising, but then there have been some trace of wars going on between the 2 countries about which attacked which and which are the victims and who are doing the worst practices in the cyberspace. Is it possible, I want to have your technical expertise here, to identify exactly where an IP address is coming from? Is it possible to locate a specific person, a specific computer, or rather these can all be faked?
This is a very good question. That, as you know, the internet is actually follows a very open protocol, where we register IPs, from IPv4 to IPv6 and all those things. Then a country actually will be allocated with a certain chunk of those addresses. But as you talk about all those kind of cyber attacks, even if you detect certain activities from certain IP address, it doesn't mean it's actually really coming from the attackers from that particular country. So it's actually technically quite sophisticated, difficult to make certain conclusions.
It is difficult to make certain conclusions. And therefore, can cyber war, in other words, really be well-funded in a way? Because it is very hard, according to your expertise, to identify exactly where the hacking is coming from, or at least the location of the hacking, or the country where the hacking is coming from.
I think the overall, as you think about all kind of cyber attacks and all the cyber activities, it's kind of like what we see in Chinese, the cat and mouse, the game here. And as technology is getting more sophisticated, both from the government and the corporation and technology companies like Microsoft, we develop more and more sophisticated technology to detect those things and come up with approaches. At the same time, the sophistication for the hackers can also arise. So it continues to be a very complicated computer science problem.
But then as a result, because there is so-called the national security issue, as a result, are scientific communities and technology communities more united or rather much more divided these days about finding a common conclusion? United to find a conclusion, united to find some solutions against hacking, or every expert in different countries are working for their own country to attack the other countries. Which is the bigger possibility as you see it?
I actually glad to have an opportunity here, hopefully to explain to the general public the meaning of a hacker. As I grew up as a computer science student, and we actually take a great pride in being able to hack. In a way, hacking is synonymous to culture as a programming. And in good universities like MIT or Carnegie Mellon, where I studied, and we really want the students to learn the practical skills, for example, really detect whether the network has some technical issues, can be broken into. So there is this very healthy element of hacking in the scientific community. Having said that, for us, in the computer industry, we do classify hackers into different categories. It's so-called black hat versus the white hat. For those black hat hackers, they actually have some intentions to hurt some people or steal something or do something really bad or malicious. So those people are labeled as the black hat. At the same time, you have good students, like those of us studying in the top universities, and we really learn the skills to really push the limit, understand the limit of the computer systems we have built, whether it's network, whether it's operating system, and so forth. Then, of course, it's never really that black and white. So there are also third category called gray hats.
Wow, you're getting me much more confused than when we began. But to understand the situation better, because right now, coming from the Defense Department in the United States, the worst is that there is every option of retaliation is on the table if the U.S. is receiving cyber attack against its government systems or crucial military systems. But then, what does it mean? Does it mean a cyber war is really going toward a traditional warfare? Or it means that there is going to be huge competitions among different countries when it comes to how to hack others and how to protect itself from being hacked?
I think as we progress, both in technology and in our society, we need to look at the new problems and with very open minds point of view. And the computer networks is really something new that happened only like 50 years ago. And we today look at all those activities. I think multiple nations, different countries, including big corporations, we need to sit down and look at those problems, really figure out what should be the new rules that govern our society.
Are there enough new rules, you think, at least in the American society, as far as you know, in the Chinese society regarding the moral standards and also the legal standards?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think different countries are progressing at different speeds, in my opinion. If you look at that, even in the United States, where I currently live, and we struggle too. And the latest, the greatest example, only about a few weeks ago, is this famous hacker, is a brilliant student, tragically died, and he actually committed suicide, Aaron Swartz. And he did something, it sort of broke the law in the United States. Yet he had a lot of sympathy by a lot of people, including myself. But there is law there, and there is a law there that most of us, all of us, have to obey. And then we look at law, we say, should we evolve the law? Should we change the law to be more appropriate given the current situation in our society?
Final question before we go, Dr. Shum. Your corporation is one of those well-known all over the world. There are others many Chinese customers are using.
Right.
And these corporations are mainly based inside the United States or in the Western countries. And therefore, there's a natural question people ask. Is there going to be a breach of the national security in China if Chinese are using others' products, meaning products produced by companies that are based elsewhere rather than in China?
I think we are very, very clear. Microsoft, even though we started it from the United States, we are a multinational company. We have the responsibility for all our customers, including multiple the governments and the corporations in other countries, that they are all our customers. And we have the responsibility to do the right things to protect all our customers' interests. So we share our data including the cybersecurity activity data with the governments and cooperate with them, share the information, and want to do the right things.
The governments meaning not only the U.S. government,
not
but
only
also
US
the governments in
also
which
the
the
UK
countries...
government, also the Chinese government, and the Japanese government.
I see. Thank you very much, Harry Shum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's have a break. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Dialogue. Join me right now. We have Mr. Yang Mingjie, Vice President of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations with us. Welcome, sir.
Hello.
Earlier, we've been talking to a computer scientist about the scientific and the technological challenges behind the hacking. And of course, Chinese Department of National Defense has denied any involvement of supporting hacking against the United States. But many wonder what exactly is the current situation involving hacking wars going on between whether China and the US or other countries.
First, I think because Chinese official position is very clear that China is maybe is one of the biggest victim of cyber attackers in the world, and as well as United States, because we are both victims. And also maybe most of the attack from United States IP. That not means United States, but we are facing the threat from cyberspace. And so that's why Chinese officials use one word, they call it a community of common destiny, which means that we are in the same boat of cyberspace, but we are dangerous because of the cyberspace is so complicated.
Well, that's for sure, common destiny. However, how much opportunity do you see with the finger pointing going on between the two countries that there might be any opportunity to cooperate together to counter the cyber crimes or the possibility of cyber war?
Yeah, but I think the opportunity is existing there. But the problem is that until now, there is no common, I think, is a consensus on cooperation. Until now, maybe there are also some misunderstanding and some suspicions between China and the United States, also between Russia and the United States. That's a real problem. And for example, that's why some reports from the United States, they argue China as one of the maybe the target or enemies in the cyberspace. And there are also some worries from Chinese side, worried that the United States want to enhance its capabilities of the so-called cyberspace warfare. It's a one to against China and one to other countries. So
at this moment, as you may know very well, Mr. Yang, according to the Pentagon, all options are on the table in terms of how to retaliate against any hacking or cyber attacks against the U.S. system. And that also means traditional warfare options are also on the table. Do you think, though, that is also one of the major concerns many people have in this world? That is, one, rounds of or different rounds of cyber attacks against one another eventually lead to traditional warfare between countries or even among countries. Is there a possibility?
It's just one scenario, but I think the possible scenario is that it's a non-traditional warfare will be happen, no matter what will be happened in the cyberspace. But for me, I think that if you want to make a cyber attack against other countries, that's a war. It's an endless war, and that means a very non-traditional war. It means that all the actors will be involved, not all the traditional army or your national force, but also non-state actors will be involved. Not only who is the beginner, attacker, but also the victim will be involved in the civilian facilities.
How vulnerable is China?
I want to say frankly, we are very vulnerable. The first one is that China is becoming the first IT country in the world, not only because we are the biggest number of end users, but also because our society economic development depends much on cyberspace. There are also some, we call it e-government or e-business, something like that. Secondly is that most of the high-tech IT infrastructures was not dominated by ourselves. We import a lot of technologies and some software and hardware from other countries. And thirdly is that because China is become highlighted in the world, it's not only other states, but also some non-state actors that are interested in China. They have some for example, some hackers, they have some ambitions, want to penetrate in the Chinese IT system. That will make a disaster for China. But on the other side, I think in recent years, and the Chinese government had found the problem and want to enhance we call it the cyber and information security. So that's why last July, the State Council published a recommendation for cybersecurity issues.
And therefore, if China is as vulnerable as you just illustrated, does China have any new initiatives that China can put on the table so that everybody in the world can look into and say, let's begin our negotiations, let's begin our process of working together to work on the possibility against hacking?
Yes, I think that China has begun our work. And on the international level, China, Russia, and Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, with 4 countries, gave a proposal for the United Nations. We call it the Code of Conduct on Cybersecurity, and want to prevent any confrontation and warfare in the cyberspace. And secondly, on the regional level, we have begun our cooperation with ASEAN countries and Japan and Korea on security, on cybersecurity
This
issues.
is very interesting phenomenon, Mr. Yang, because you see China, Russia working together. Meanwhile, some of the former bodies of the former Soviet Union are also in this package. While on the other hand, you see the United States is working together with the UK and some of the Western countries. Some might argue at this moment, this is very clear a divide of the model of the Cold War that is once again emerging when it comes to a possibility of a cyber war. So is there a possibility, Mr. Yang, that people or countries can work together across the hall, across the aisle, rather than once again creating another round of Cold War, only this time in cyberspace?
But at the beginning, if you just look at the 2 maybe blocks, as you mentioned, maybe it's something look like the Cold War, but the 2 block is not isolated block. And we can say, for example, like China, Russia, we have a proposal, but the proposal for the United Nations is open, not only to the developing country, but also to the United States. And even China and Russia, we have some dialogue with European countries, including UK, on cybersecurity issues. So that is so different from the Cold War, because the people are waiting for cooperation. Maybe at the beginning there are some different opinions, but after negotiation, maybe the 2 blocks will be integrated together. I have some optimistic about the future.
Let's just be frank here, Mr. Yang, that it is no secret that whether individuals or governments are now using cyberspace to attack one another. It is just one of those well-known facts in our world today. The question is, when it's already reaching this level, when national security is already deeply involved, whether within a country or among countries, countries have to work together now to avoid any worst scenario. And therefore, I would ask your expertise, where to begin with? You see already this horrible war going on between China and the United States. China has been outlined in international press as the one that's stealing away others' data, as the one who's attacking the other through the cyberspace. So where are we now? Seems to be in a very critical moment. What is China's initiative? When and how are the rest of the world going to know whether others are willing to work with China to against the cyber attack, or rather these kind of accusations going to continue as long as any company just put forward a report against China?
I think that China and the United States has begun some, as you mentioned, initiative, but I think the first step for cooperation, because there are some different channels, we call it the track 2 dialogue between China and the United States on cybersecurity issues. For example, some dialogue is maybe focused on some, they call it governance on cyberspace, and some on the bilateral cooperation on security issues. That is a very good beginning for the 2 countries. So my personal initiative for the 2 countries is that the important thing is not for the government, it's for the society. Because the reports come from the United States, is personal companies and very small companies. They have some different opinions and they have some reports.
Right.
But the problem is that the people who give the education for the society to know the dangers of the confrontation on cyberspace.
But that does need the government's involvement
Yeah.
to set the rules of the games. What exactly is going to be the rule of the game?
It's not the rule of game, it's maybe called the rule of governance or rule of cooperation. It's not just play as a game, because for me, I think that if we're thinking cybersecurity is a game, that is very dangerous. For example, next day thinking is, some people thinking is a game like the Cold War, the nuclear game, they call it a cyber deterrence, which means that we will give a deterrence for you. That is very dangerous. So what means deter? That if you want to deter other countries, so what's the response for other side? So that is a disaster for both countries. So we have to be very careful on that, not definition, but I think on the very concrete steps.
Yang Mingjie, Vice President of China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us.
Thanks.
And thank you for watching. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Bye for now.
Locate the physical address of the attackers. The IP address can be easily simulated or transferred. It's just like you cannot locate a physical address by simply tracking phone numbers.
Senior Internet engineer Cai Zhiqiang says cyber attacks are transnational, anonymous, and deceptive, with their sources often difficult to identify.
The U.S. Internet security firm says China's military is behind the hacking of the U.S. agencies and businesses. Chinese military has dismissed the accusations and says China itself is the biggest victim of cyber attack and that most of them come from the U.S.
China's military says that in 2012 alone, foreign hackers used viruses and other malicious software to seize control of Chinese computers and websites. Chinese experts say the U.S. accusation has a complex background.
The U.S. accusations of Chinese cyber espionage or cyber threats have deep social and political motives, as well as national interest and Western ideology.
But why do you think the U.S. selects China?
China's IT sector and economy have grown rapidly, and the U.S. sees China's rise as a challenge to its interests.
Professor Wei Wei believes the release of the Mandarin report increases the pressure on the U.S. government to take more forceful action to contain China's cyber development. Hanbin, CCTV.
Dr. Shang, welcome to Dialogue. There has been a lot of information in the news suggesting there have been cyber attacks coming from China. Meanwhile, China has been claiming that itself been attacked by hackers, both from within the country and also from overseas. That's according to the National Computer Network Emergency Response Coordination Center here in this country. How serious is the situation?
There have been a lot more cyber activities around the world. From what we can see, Microsoft, we actually are very interested in seeing the situation evolving. And we have actually recently have done a study overall looking at some index numbers of overall the cyber.
The unfounded accusations, the Ministry of National Defense here in China responded quickly with a written statement and a news conference. So what lies behind the groundless China bashing in cyberspace? Are IP addresses convincing evidence of hacking? Now I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Harry Shang. He is the Corporate Vice President of Microsoft Corporation. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
But before we go to a discussion with you, let's take a look at this background report.
Secrets of U.S. government data and corporate trade. These are the things reported to be stolen by China's military. The evidence is the IP addresses linked to China. Chinese cybersecurity experts say the assumption lacks technical foundations.
It's impossible to locate.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Dialogue coming to you on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. U.S. has always been pointing its finger at China for alleged online attacks. Its media complained earlier this year their computer systems were breached by China-based hackers. And recently, U.S. cybersecurity firm Mandiant released a report alleging that a secret Chinese military unit in Shanghai was behind years of cyber attacks against the U.S. companies. Confronted with